Did Jesus even exist? Not was he God, not did he rise, not do you believe, just exist. Because that's the move now. You'll notice it. They skip the hard parts, right? They delete the man entirely. And if you erase the body, you erase the mind, and you never have to deal with the claims. It's clean, it's convenient, and it sounds actually really, really smart until you actually look at history. Because here's the problem. We accept people, right, with far less evidence every single day. But when it comes to Jesus, suddenly everyone turns into a forensic absolutist. No video, no live stream, no TikTok from 30 AD. Must be a myth. It's funny how that standard only shows up when God enters the room, right? So tonight we're not doing theology per se. We're doing faith. We're doing history. And by the end, you'll have to decide whether Jesus was fiction or whether pretending that he never existed is actually the fairy tale itself. I'm going to start with this scene that you guys have seen 100 times, even if you don't realize it. You know this kind of guy, right? He leans back in a chair like he owns the room, smirks like he just solved life, and says something real cocky and arrogant. Religion is just a mythology. He says it like a mic drop, right? Like the universe itself just clapped for him. Brava. Brava. The people around him nod because nodding is cheaper than thinking. We all know that. And maybe you've been that guy who nodded, or maybe you've been that guy in the chair, right? I'm not judging you. I'm just telling you something that when people say that, they're not usually rejecting Christianity. They're rejecting the cheap imitation that they were handed, right? The paper mache version, the Jesus is the vibe version, the soft focus moral advice therapy Jesus version. That one, yeah, okay, that one probably deserves to be rejected. But the real Christianity, right, the one that shows up in history, in blood, in Roman law, in named governors, in public execution, that Christianity, that movement should have died in its crib, because that one doesn't fit anything in the mythology box. And that's exactly why people try so hard to cram it in there anyway. Now, let me tell you why I'm starting here, because if you lose this point first, the rest of the series becomes a hobby, becomes a book club. It's interesting religious trivia, I guess. But if you get this first point, if you establish that Christianity is not a misty spiritual philosophy, right, but a historical claim, then the whole thing changes. Now you're not just dealing with opinions, you're dealing with events. And events don't care about your mood. Events don't ask permission. They sit there like a cold body on the floor, waiting for somebody to explain how in the heck it got there. That's Christianity. A body laying on the floor of history while everybody else tries to pretend that they don't see it. So here's the first question, and it's going to sound simple until you try to answer it honestly. What kind of claim is Christianity? Is it a spiritual preference one, like I like vanilla, you like chocolate? Or is it a public historical claim? Rome ruled Judea. Pilate governed. Crucifixion was a Roman punishment, things like that. Because if Christianity is the first one, the chocolate vanilla thing, then sure, dismiss it, ignore it, stick it next to astrology and essential oils. But if it's the second one, if it's the public claim that's rooted in time, place, rulers, witnesses, then you can't just dismiss it like a bedtime story. You have to engage it the way that you would engage any historical claim, right? You ask what happened, what sources say, what enemies admit, and what explanation fits the facts without cheating. Now, here's where most people do the cheating. They want to talk about evidence, but they don't mean evidence really, right? They mean modern forensic 4K video evidence. They want God to be their personal content creator. They want heaven to run like a live stream and just upload it to the cloud. And if God didn't do that, then they pretend nothing happened, right? Which is hilarious because if you think about it, none of these people live that way in any other part of their life. They don't demand 4K footage from Julius Caesar crossing the Rubicon. They don't demand audio from Socrates speaking at Athens, right? They don't demand, hey, can I get a signed selfie from Alexander the Great while he's at the gates of Persia? They don't do that. They accept those figures as historical because ancient history doesn't work like your iPhone camera roll. Ancient history works like a courtroom with old files, partial records, hostile witnesses, and enough corroboration that the best explanation becomes obvious to anyone who isn't emotionally invested in it being false. So let me give you an analogy, right? This is going to be so clean, it's going to make you mad. Imagine you walk into your kitchen and the cookie jar is smashed on the floor. Crumbs everywhere. Chocolate on your kid's face. Your dog looks guilty and your kid looks innocent in the way that only guilty people look innocent. Now, do you need a security camera to know what happened? Or do you operate like an adult and say, okay, we got a broken jar, we got crumbs, we have motive, we have a chocolate smeared mouth, and we have a living room basically that looks like a snack-based crime scene. See, that's how humans reason about reality. That's how historians reason about the past. You don't need perfection. You need enough converging lines of evidence that the denial starts looking like a lifestyle choice, right? It's the denial that sounds stupid. Here's the point. Ancient history is not reconstructed with video footage. It's reconstructed with sources, written accounts, multiple attestations, timing, enemy testimony, embarrassing details that nobody would ever want to admit, and archaeology that either fits the world described or it doesn't. That's the method. And the moment that Christianity enters the room, people suddenly act like they've never heard of that method. They pretend ancient history is only valid when it flatters them or, and basically it becomes invalid when it confronts them. But see, that's not skepticism. That's basically nothing more than selective amnesia. Now, Christianity is uniquely risky because it's not built that way. It's not built on ideas. It is actually built on events. And ideas can be remodeled, right? Events cannot. Philosophies can evolve slowly until basically nobody remembers the original. Events either happened or they did not happen. Christianity says that God did something in public history. It says the central figure, Jesus of Nazareth, walked into a real province, under Roman occupation, under a real emperor, under real laws, and was executed in a method designed to humiliate and erase him. And then it says something even more dangerous, that he did not stay dead. Not metaphorically, not spiritually, no. Not in our hearts. No. It says the tomb was empty and he was seen alive. That claim, if false, should have been pretty easy to expose early, right? Jerusalem wasn't Narnia. It was a real city with real authorities and real enemies who would have loved nothing more than to crush the movement by producing a body. And right here, right now, I can hear the modern skeptic warming up his favorite line. One he thinks makes him sound like a genius. You can't use the Bible as evidence. That's circular reasoning. Fine. I'll play the game for a moment. I'll set the Bible aside temporarily, but not because it's weak, but because I'm not interested in letting someone hide behind a slogan, right? We'll step outside Christian sources and ask a simpler question. Do non-Christian sources, not the Bible, do non-Christian sources confirm Jesus existed and was executed? Because if the answer is yes to that, the whole mythology label starts falling apart real quick. And it just so happens the answer to that question is yes. Let's talk about hostile witnesses. In any courtroom, a hostile witness is valuable because you're not relying on affection. You're relying on admissions. You're relying on the fact that someone who does not like you still confirms the basic outline because reality cornered them, right? The Roman historian Tacitus wasn't a Christian fanboy at all. He was the kind of guy who'd cross the street to avoid you. Yet he writes about Christus being executed under Pontius Pilate during the reign of Tiberius. And he notes the movement itself spread. It's not a church newsletter, right? Especially not a Christian church newsletter. You know what those are like. That's hostile Roman elite historiography, acknowledging the basic facts. Josephus, a Jewish historian, is not writing at all to make Christians feel good. He's reporting what was known at the time. Jesus existed, was known as a teacher, was executed, and his followers persisted. Fact. Then you've got Roman officials like Pliny the Younger writing about Christians worshiping Christ as a god, which matters because it shows early devotion wasn't some late medieval invention like a lot of people like to tell you that it is. The point isn't that every detail is settled here in week 1 of this. The point is that Jesus doesn't vanish when you step outside the Bible. He remains like a suspect who keeps showing up on camera no matter how many times you try to change the angle. Now, let me tell you the part that always gets swept under the rug by mythology talk. Crucifixion. Crucifixion wasn't just a death penalty. It was a message. Rome didn't just kill you. Rome made sure you died in a way that told the entire city, don't even think about it. It was public. It was degrading. It was designed to destroy honor. And for Jews, it was worse. A crucified Messiah is a contradiction in terms. If your expectations are a conquering king, you don't invent a savior who gets nailed up like a criminal. You just don't. It's not how propaganda works. That's not how legend making works. If Christians were inventing a religion, they would have invented a glorious victory story, a throne, a crown, a military uprising, something that flatters the audience. Instead, Christianity begins with failure, humiliation, and blood. That is the opposite of what you manufacture if you're trying to sell a myth to a hostile world. So here's the problem you have to face if you're honest. If you're honest, you've got to do this, right? Something happened after that crucifixion. Something created a movement that went from terrified followers to public proclaimers. And don't give me the Hollywood version of early Christians like they were just these good-hearted dreamers holding hands and humming hymns. La, la, la. No. This was an environment where proclaiming a crucified and risen Messiah got you mocked at best and punished at worst. Jews considered it blasphemy. Romans considered it social disorder. You don't choose that life because you want likes and followers. This isn't some kind of brand strategy. This is a decision that gets you in horrific trouble. Now, let me make this plain with a modern example, okay? Imagine this. Imagine your best friend tells you that he saw a man rise from the dead. And because of it, he's going to start a movement that'll get him fired, alienated, and possibly beaten, and maybe even executed. What are you going to do? You're going to ask, bro, are you insane? And if he says, no, I'm telling you I saw it. Then the next question is, okay, what do I do with that? That's the kind of claim Christianity is. Not be nice, right? Not some be nice slogan. Not a vague moral improvement plan. It's a historical claim that forces a response because it breaks all categories. Now, at this point, the skeptic will try another move. He'll say, people die for lies all the time. True. People do die for lies that they believe are true. People do not die for lies that they know are false, ever. That's the difference between a deluded martyr and a fabricated conspiracy. And early Christianity wasn't built on one guy in a cave saying he had a private vision. It was built on a public proclamation that centered, now watch this, in the same city where the execution occurred. That's important. See, if the story is false, Jerusalem is the worst place on earth to launch that kind of story. It's like claiming that you saw Bigfoot in the parking lot of the zoo while standing next to the director. Yeah, I saw him there. Yeah, he was big. Bro, the enemies are right there. The authorities that can contradict you are right there. The counter evidence, if it exists, is right there. You don't start it there, for God's sakes, man. Think, right? If Christianity was merely a myth, it should have been strangled in its cradle right there. Instead, what happened? It grew. And now we reach the moment where I stop treating you like some spectator, right? And I start treating you like a participant, because that's what history does. Once you grant the minimum facts that Jesus existed, that he was executed, that a resurrection claim erupted immediately afterward, you no longer get to sit in the judge's chair acting like you're above the case. Now you owe an explanation. And this is where the people get nervous, right? Because neutrality is the world's favorite little hiding place. Neutrality is where you pretend you're just being rational when really you're avoiding the implications. See, history doesn't let you stay neutral. If the cookie jar is broken and your kid's face is covered in chocolate, your refusal to decide is not sophistication. It's just denial, right? So I'm going to press you with the question that you can't dodge forever. Why is Christianity held to a different standard than everything else in ancient history? Why do we accept lesser documentation for emperors and philosophers, but we demand a cosmic live stream for Jesus Christ? Why do we act like ancient sources are valid until they implied God stepped into history, and then suddenly we all become, well, I don't know about that. No, I'm a forensic absolutist. I think I'd know the difference. What? What is that? Is it really about evidence, or is it about control? See, if Christianity is true, it's not just informative, it's authoritative. It doesn't ask your permission. It claims you belong to someone, and people will tolerate basically almost anything but that. I belong to somebody? I don't think so. Nobody owns me. Nobody tells me what to do. Look, here's another analogy. You ever notice how people can tolerate spirituality as long as it's like a diffuser? Like, it's pleasant, it's optional, it makes the room smell nice. But the moment God becomes a person who commands, judges, forgives, and owns you, now everybody's an atheist philosopher. Now everybody's got standards. Now everybody's a legal expert. They all know what they're talking about. They tell you that the problem isn't that Christianity makes claims. No. The problem is what those claims mean if they're true. You can dismiss a myth. You can't dismiss a king. Now, I'm not asking you to accept every Christian claim right now. That's not the move. Week one of what we're doing here is the courtroom. Basically, the doors are opening, right? The bailiff calls the room to order. The evidence cart rolls in. The question is not, do you believe? The question is, are you going to be honest about what kind of thing that we're dealing with right now? Because if Christianity is not a myth in the same category as pagan God stories, right? Those myths are usually disconnected from specific falsifiable claims, and they're tied to some cyclical nature of symbolism and whatnot, whatever. Christianity is the opposite. It literally, now watch this, it literally pins itself to one scandalous historical assertion that Jesus Christ was publicly executed and then publicly proclaimed risen in a way that created a movement so powerful that it completely transformed and outlived empires. That ain't mythology. That's a historical phenomenon demanding explanation. And if you're thinking, okay, but lots of movements demand explanation, you're right. Absolutely right. But Christianity's explanation is not because the message was nice. The message was an insult to everyone's pride. To Jews, it sounded like blasphemy and failure. To Romans, it sounded like disorder and superstition. To philosophers, it sounded like foolishness. Paul even says as much. And yet it spread anyway. That's the part that should haunt you. It spread anyway. It offended everybody, and it spread anyway. Comfortable ideas spread easily, right? We know that. We see it every day. Dangerous claims do not, unless something somehow forces them forward. So here's what I want you to walk away with today. And I want it to land like a weight, not a slogan. Christianity is not primarily a set of morals. It is not primarily a social club. It is not primarily a therapeutic identity. Christianity is a historical claim about what God did in time and space. That means it can be investigated historically. That means it can be challenged historically. It can be defended historically, and it can be rejected historically. But it cannot be dismissed as just mythology without intellectual dishonesty. If you reject it, fine, but reject the real thing. Don't shadowbox a straw man and call it courage. Because once you admit that Christianity is historical, you've already crossed the line. Now the question becomes, what happened? And once you ask that question honestly, the trail leads somewhere very specific. It leads to a first century world under Rome. It leads to a volatile Judea full of messianic expectation. It leads to the fact that this explosion did not happen in a vacuum. It happened in the most politically combustible place on earth at the most dangerous time on earth, which is exactly where we're going next. So if you want to keep pretending Christianity is a myth, you can. People pretend a lot of things. But if you want to be honest, if you want to handle Christianity the way that you handle every other ancient claim, then you're going to have to follow the evidence where it goes, not where it feels safe. And that's the deal. That's the bargain Christianity offers, not believe because I said so. See, everybody else does that, but Christianity is the one that doesn't. It does not say, believe because I said so. But investigate and then explain what you find. And if you are brave enough to do that, you might discover the thing that you did not want to discover. That you weren't judging Christianity the whole time. Christianity was judging you. All right. That's it. That's week one's line in the sand. Next week, next episode, we don't float in abstractions. We walk into the world that Jesus walked into. Rome's boot on Judea's neck. Religious factions ready to explode. Messianic expectations like dry gasoline. Roads, language, empire structure that unintentionally built a highway system for the gospel. And then we ask the question that makes skeptics sweat even to this day. Why did Christianity ignite there and then and not somewhere safer, not somewhere quieter, and not someplace, for God's sakes, easier to fake? Of all places, it starts where it ended. Because if the timing and location makes sense, the mythology label is going to start, it's going to start looking like a desperate exit sign. And I've got news for you. Exits are harder to find than people think. See you next time.